So it could be anything from maybe someone cuts you off in traffic, that really irritating thing that could happen right on your way into work, right as you're starting your day. What is the narrative? What is the dialogue that's happening in your brain when that happens? There's so many different associations that our brains can use to try and apply meaning to that interaction. Unfortunately, the meaning that we're associating here usually doesn't match up. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Love Your Brain podcast, or welcome if you're new. Now, we have all had those days where we cross paths with just that one person. It's not a great exchange, and it completely throws off our entire day. As small as that thing could be, someone cutting us off in traffic, that customer service rep that we talked to that got a little short with us on the phone, or just even that side comment someone made that felt really hurtful. Sadly, these seemingly small interactions can, in fact, throw off our entire day. And without knowing why, it feels straight up frustrating. Like, I did everything I knew to have a good day today, and then this one little thing just threw everything off. And now you feel grumpy, you feel short with people, you feel sad, you feel depressed. It just feels irritating because your emotions are impacted as if this was a really big thing, but it was in fact just a small interaction. So, why? Well, today we are going to talk about the two biggest factors, and that is ratio and meaning. And I'll explain in detail what each of those are a little bit later. But first, I want to explain the why of this whole situation, why this information is important. I have all too often seen people feel like the control over their day is determined by outside factors. And when that one bad interaction happens, they just feel like they're sucked into this negative energy spiral and just can't get out. But one of the reasons why people feel this way and feel so strongly and so defeated when it occurs is simply because of a lack of information and a lack of understanding. Whenever there is a lack of information and understanding, our brains try to fill in the gaps. And often it's not with actual factual information that is grounded in any kind of truth. So, when we can take these situations and actually break them down and actually put truth to it, we can see why they're having this effect on us. It can really help us to understand how the machine of our brain is working in a way that takes away a bit of the fear that happens when we have these negative spirals. And it helps us to get into what I like to call observation mode, where we can observe what is happening in our brains and really separate it a bit from our emotions and our meaning of who we are. To be able to see its process and be like, okay, brain, I see what you're doing there. It really depersonalizes it a bit and takes away the fear of why this is happening to me and puts you in the seat of more of an observer of your own brain. One really good example of this is if you're ever sick, right? If you can understand more about that sickness and what's going to happen, as you're recovering or whatever the case is, it can really help you feel a lot better as those symptoms arise. I remember years ago, I learned that when you have pneumonia, you can actually have shoulder pain. Never in a million years would I have expected that. But a doctor explained that to me, and very clearly, this makes sense as to why that information would be helpful, right? If you have pneumonia and your shoulder starts hurting, typically what your brain would do would be like, become very, catastrophizing, right? It would probably go, oh my gosh, I had pneumonia and now I've also injured my shoulder. I'm falling apart. Everything is awful. You really get into a negative thought spiral. But with the information that, okay, I have pneumonia, my shoulder is hurting, but I do understand that's a part of the process. Oh my gosh, you feel completely different having that information with how this all works so that you can kind of ride that wave until you get better instead of falling down this spiral of negativity. They're very different feelings, right? When you have no information about why it's working that way, and when you have even just a little bit of information as to why it's working that way. So that's what I'm hoping to give you today with this information is that you get just a little bit more information about what's happening in your brain when that one interaction totally throws you off, so that maybe you can feel a little bit more neutral and a little bit better, a little bit less afraid of, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart, because it's not. So that is a little bit of what I hope to give you today as we talk about it. If you stick to the end, you are going to hear a pretty funny analogy I like to use that might be helpful for you. So stick through it to the end. So let's first talk about the first reason this happens, this feeling of, oh my gosh, my whole day is ruined after this one interaction. Now, this first reason I want to talk about is what I like to call ratio. And I want you to try and picture for this comparison a glass of water, of clear water in a glass just sitting in front of you. And picture that as your energy for your whole day. So, as you start off, you wake up in the morning, hopefully you feel pretty neutral, or at least we hope to start off that way, right? So, your glass is just pretty much completely clear. Now, we're going to say that any positive interactions we have are going to be blue, and then any negative interactions we have are going to be red. So each time you interact with someone, a drop of that corresponding color gets dropped into your glass, and you'll see over time, after you have lots of interactions, how that color starts to change. Now, I will go into this a little bit more detail later, but negative and positive interactions do have different weights to them. But let's just say each positive interaction gets a drop of blue and each negative interaction gets a drop of red. So think about you going through your day, you're getting drops of this, drops of that. You'll probably, at the end of the day, realistically, if you're just looking at that, come up with maybe like a purple color to your water, right? Combining blue and red. Here is the tricky part though. What if you are someone who isn't having just a lot of interactions in general? Maybe you just have one negative interaction with someone and then the rest of the day you pretty much keep to yourself. Maybe that kind of took the wind out of your sails and you're like, I'm done with people today. Well, your glass is going to be bright red. That's the only color that's in it. And that's because of ratio. You didn't have any blue drops, you didn't have any positive interactions, so all there is red. But in fact, it was just one drop of red. Now, say someone else looks at your glass color, they might think, possibly because of how red your water is, that you had a lot of bad things happen in your day. But that's simply not the case. It's because your ratio is all just 100% one red drop, no blue. Whereas someone who has maybe 10 negative interactions and 10 positive interactions might have more purple coloring to their water. And maybe someone might think that person's day was a lot better, that they had less negative interactions, but in fact, they actually had more negative interactions as opposed to the first scenario. So, see where because of this ratio of interactions, it can really cause us to view our day differently. It can affect our attitude much differently. So keep in mind, if you are someone who isn't having a lot of interactions to actually balance out the negative, little interactions here and there can have a lot more weight to them. The day can appear worse for that reason because that one negative interaction may be the only interaction that you're having. I see this a lot in people who either live alone or work from home, or maybe there's someone that's really struggling with their mental health, or maybe they're just naturally introverted. A lot of those things can play a part in how many interactions you're having and can really distort our brains and how they're operating when we have maybe just one negative interaction. My mom is someone who has lived alone for many years. We often have to have this conversation, even if she just has one negative doctor appointment and then goes home and just thinks about it all day long. Well, she hasn't had any positive interactions. She hasn't picked up the phone to call someone who she knows is going to be really positive and upbeat and encouraging for her. So she's just sitting with that cup in front of her that just looks completely red, but it just needs a couple drops of blue in there, right? To really balance it out. And sometimes that's things that we have to initiate. So if we take that idea of the ratio and then we pile on top of that how our evolutionary brain works, It's always paid more attention to the negative because when we were evolving, say, we were living out in the wild, our brains actually had to pay attention more to the negative things because when we see negative things happen, it could affect our survival. Whereas positive things didn't always have a huge impact on our survival, but negative, that could mean we need to jump into action to save our own life. So you can see how our brains are actually magnifying the negative versus the positive really is part of a survival instinct. Now, for the next part I want to go over, I want to talk a little bit about meaning, and that is the meaning that our brains are associating with the experience that we're having. Every interaction we have, our brain automatically tries to apply meaning to that interaction. It doesn't matter what it is. And sadly, sometimes the truth of the interaction and the meaning that we apply are way far apart from each other. They're not even remotely on the same page. That's just how it works. Our brains have been conditioned to respond a certain way and to associate a certain meaning to certain interactions. So think about it this way. When you have that negative interaction with someone, your brain is going to immediately try to apply the meaning to it. So it could be anything from maybe someone cuts you off in traffic, that really irritating thing that could happen right on your way into work, right as you're starting your day. What is the thing? What is the narrative? What is the dialogue that's happening in your brain when that happens? It could be something like, that person doesn't respect me. They don't know who I am. Maybe they don't like me. Maybe that's why they cut me off. Maybe they're jealous of me. Maybe they just think they're better than me. Maybe they're a jerk. Maybe they just are trying to be mean, right? There's so many different associations that our brains can use to try and apply meaning to that interaction. Unfortunately, the meaning that we're associating here usually doesn't match up. It's actually matching up with a core wound we have or a negative belief that we have about ourselves. However, your brain has been conditioned to respond, it's going to respond. So, if you are someone who struggles to see your own value, your brain will likely interpret negative interactions with this person not respecting you or thinking something negative about you. If your brain has been conditioned to think it's always in a fight against the world, then the meaning your brain will associate with a negative interaction like that will likely be tied to that person wanting to come at you in a combative way. That person is a jerk or they just wanted to make you mad. You can see the patterns here. But if we can remember that our brain is just a machine, it's spitting out the thoughts that it's been conditioned to have and wired to create, it can help depersonalize these interactions. Because the truth is, usually when you have a negative interaction with someone, it's 99% about them. Whatever their day has been like, whatever they're experiencing, whatever their own personal dialogue is, has caused them to respond to you in a way that maybe is not ideal. You may have triggered something in them, but that is all about them and their journey and not about who you are as a human being. I used to be a long distance runner and would always joke that if you're passing by someone on a trail and you smile and you say hi and they only grimace at you, it is so frustrating. You're like, here I am on my run, I'm trying to be friendly, and this person is just whatever your meaning is, right? Maybe it's they're a jerk or they don't like me or whatever it is. So, to combat that, as silly as it sounds, I would always try to think in my head, maybe that person just has gas. They probably didn't smile at me. They probably grimaced at me because they are having some gastrointestinal distress. Because truth be told, when you are a long distance runner, that is very common. So maybe that's their journey right now, is that they're just not up for smiling and waving because they have got something going on internally. And truly, I try to carry that over into every interaction that I have with someone that's negative. Most people responding to you negatively are probably struggling in some way on their own journey, and you literally just crossed their path. And that struggle overflowed onto you a little bit. So just remember, if we take all these factors, the ratio of negative to positive interactions we've had in the day, how your evolutionary brain magnifies the negative, and how our brains attempt to assign meaning to our interactions, if you put that all together, it can really help you to see why one seemingly small interaction with someone could, in fact, totally derail your day. So Now you know a bit about what's happening in your brain and what's happening behind the scenes, so that next time your day starts getting derailed, maybe you can take a pause, think about these things and what factors might be coming into play for you. I think that observation time where you can just step back and be like, okay, I see what you're doing here, brain. That makes sense why you would be telling me that. Just observing it can be so powerful. It can really put the brakes on any kind of negative thought spiral that you're on. So remember, next time someone that you wave at or smile at and they don't smile back, or maybe they just roll their eyes or whatever it is, just think they might actually just have gas. Have a great week, guys. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.